And I think we have to pause and say it's a very difficult period globally. Globally, we're seeing a recession in democratic governance and a rise in authoritarianism. And it's a challenge in Africa and in the Horn, but also across the globe. And so we all need to continue to work hard to address those problems and to find a negotiated path, when possible, to conflict. In the Horn, the most acute crisis right now is in Sudan, and I think everyone knows that. And my deep fear, honestly, is that if we cannot find a way to pressure the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to find a way to a ceasefire, that Sudan could break apart the way Somalia has broken apart and suffer from years of conflict. So we all need to work on that issue. And Sudan, of course, like Somalia, shares a border or coastline on the Red Sea. In Ethiopia, such an important country historically, such a partner to many countries in the region, historically a leader, not only in the region and in the continent. There continue to be challenges. The guns were silenced in Tigray, and that's very positive. But we continue to need to see more work done for reconciliation there and to manage the challenges that now are in other regions of Ethiopia, where there are insurgencies and a often unproductive government response to those insurgencies. You all know well the rich history of Ethiopia, the rich diversity, which led, I think, those who overthrew the Derg to develop a system of ethnic federalism. It's not working now, and you will need to find a way forward. I took note of Faisal Robles' really beautiful statement earlier when he opened to think about where you have been and where you all want to go. And I think that's what this conversation is here today. How can we help all of you achieve the peace and prosperity that you're hoping for? And in Somalia, as the president said, there have been so many positive developments recently. Somalia will now be a member of the Security Council. That's an incredible honor, and we will welcome them on the council to help promote peace and security. The president has done really good work in managing your debt situation. He continues to engage with the federal member states, and we would encourage that engagement to continue to help solidify Somalia's stability. And there have been some important successes in the campaign against al-Shabaab. We also need to mention, regrettably, that ISIS is present in Somalia, so the terrorism fight continues. And it's gotten worse lately because there seem to be some contacts between al-Shabaab and the Houthis. As everyone knows, the Houthis are disrupting commercial traffic in the Red Sea. And so far, efforts of a multinational force to address that problem have not been as successful as we would like to see. We are proud of our support for Somalia. One of the diplomatic options we developed in recent years is we established what we call a quartet, which are the major partners of Somalia who support the military fight. So it includes the United States, the United Kingdom, Turkey, the Emirates, and Qatar. And so we try and coordinate our engagement so that it's complementary and reinforcing rather than inadvertently competitive to support, again, the SNA fight against al-Shabaab and ISIS. Somalia has also benefited from the support of its neighbors, who are the true contributing countries to the African mission, which has had several names, as all of you know. And so now we're looking to plan a post-ATMIS, that's the current African Union UN-supported mission in Somalia. We all hold to the goal that the president outlined, that Somalia can stand on its own feet and not need this assistance from its neighbors, but given the difficulties in the current situation, we're not quite there yet. So we need to work together to develop a successor mission to continue that engagement, so that for once and for all, you can put to bed the conflict in Somalia and devote, I think, what most governments want to devote their time and attention to, which is helping communities flourish, helping find economic prosperity and other government services. You're fortunate in the region to have a strong partner in Kenya. Kenya had gone through many challenges, but is now moving forward very positively in a number of sectors, including technology, including health, as well as governance. I think we saw the peaceful transfer of power 2 years ago. We were delighted to welcome President William Ruto to Washington last month, where he was a guest of President Biden. That was the first African head of state who was invited for a state visit since 2008. That's too much time. I think that had elapsed. But it was a great opportunity to discuss with him how the U.S. partnership in Kenya and Kenya's role in the region. You also have a great leader in Djibouti, where they face many challenges, including they're vulnerable to the current challenge from the Houthis, and we're trying to work collaboratively with our partners in Djibouti. But the president and the foreign minister have been active partners in trying to support I think, regional diplomacy to address some of these challenges. So that's a little bit of the overview, how I see it, how we see it. But I want to say that I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you, because you have a different perspective, a different set of inputs, and your guidance to me will help make the United States a stronger partner in promoting peace and security in the Horn. Thanks.
That's a good answer. It was more of an overview than I expected. We are going to have a lot of time for some questions from the audience, but I'm going to start with a question just to get it going. And there was a country that you didn't mention when you were speaking of during the overview, and so I'll ask a question about that. Eritrea's role in the Horn of Africa often intersects with regional conflicts and dynamics. That's better. What is the U.S.'s approach towards Eritrea's counterproductive or undemocratic involvement in the region?
Well, I didn't mention Eritrea, and it's in part because we right now don't have much engagement with Eritrea. As everyone knows, in the terrible war in Tigray, all the forces involved there, according to U.S. legal assessment, were guilty of war crimes. We announced an atrocity determination that determined that Eritrean forces, Ethiopian forces, Tigrayan forces, and militant groups such as Fano from Amhara had all committed war crimes in that fight. We established sanctions against some Eritrean entities because of their conduct in that war. So also given the closed and repressive nature of the Eritrean government, we have not had a good relationship. We respect that Eritrea is in an important location, that Eritrea could be an important partner and a positive force if the government chose to take steps in that direction, and we would welcome steps in that direction. But it is, there, you know well, the uneasy history between Eritrea and Ethiopia, particularly Tigray. There have been disputes about the border. We would like to encourage a peaceful settlement of the border mediation. We would like to see all Eritrean troops withdraw from Ethiopia. And again, we would welcome a productive engagement with Eritrea in the region.
Are there any questions just yet, or should, oh, yep, immediately. We have a question here. Yes, sir, you're welcome to.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Aklilu Dunlap. I am Eritrean, so thanks. I was wondering why it wasn't mentioned. I believe in the value of welcoming strangers, so I applaud everyone for all that you're doing. On the issue of Eritrea, however, where are we going with this? Especially, for example, I don't really see a presence here with the Eritrean community, and the diaspora has been so wonderful in assisting Somalia achieve all these goals that it's doing. It's an example. But where is the Eritrean community here in terms of that effort? I know that there's some hostility between the government of Eritrea and its expatriates. And I'll just wait for your answer.
Hello? Okay, I can answer that part of the question, and then if there are... I'll speak up too. I can answer that question specifically about the diaspora.
So when it comes to the diaspora, we're doing our best to make sure that every single community is represented in everything that we do, including every community. Thank you.
And when United of the WH hosts our events, we make sure to reach out to Eritrean women specifically and ask them to join in because we feel that it's very important that women from the Horn of Africa are represented in everything that we do, but specifically Eritrean women because there's very little that we can hear from the diaspora community. So we reach out, we want everybody to be involved in this, not just Ethiopians, Tigrayan, it doesn't matter. We want the entire Horn represented. Thank you for asking that question. Is there a specific question for the assistant
Yes.
director? Sure.
Hey, my name is Aziz with the Ogaden Community USA. As you can see, there's a lot of flyers that are talking about the Ogaden region that's suffering unknown disease that created a company China called Police GCL. And we've been complaining since 2014. Also, we already, they now US State Department about the issue. So we're asking why the US State Department that can go about their own investigation since the Ethiopia are denial what's going on in the region.
Okay, let me just make sure that I understood that question. You are asking about something specifically that's happening within the region that you'd like the United States to pay a little bit more attention to?
Yes.
Okay, and so is that something that the administration is thinking of, specific region issues when it comes to health and disease in the Somali region of Ethiopia? That wasn't the question. Oh, excuse me.
I didn't hear that.
It's about the oil and the Chinese connection. And so the Chinese government is sending, please.
I think the question is there's a Chinese oil companies who do the oil exploration in the oil region. So there's a lot of chemicals in the region. So livestock, camels, goats, sheep, even human beings are suffering for the last 10, 15 years. And I think the United States was aware of that. So we'd like to know, what these, how the United States will respond to that.
Thank you. I was not aware of this specific issue in Ethiopia, but I am aware generally of problematic Chinese practices in developing and exploiting African resources, where we see Chinese companies operate without regard for environmental standards or for human rights standards, for example, with child labor. So those are issues that are most properly addressed by the host government. The host government should be in discussion with any Chinese companies, whether private sector or parastatals, who engage in the extraction of African resources. So we're interested in helping African governments manage those engagements. So for example, we have technical expertise we can offer in helping a government review a contract to make sure the business contract protects those interests that I've described. So that's something we're happy and willing to do. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. We're going to take a question from here.
Okay. I would like to challenge the assumption that you mentioned about the failure of ethnic federalism in Ethiopia. I don't know where that assumption or conclusion has come from. Because we say that and we believe strictly that ethnic federalism has not been implemented fully. And there are two conflicting views about what is going on as far as the ethnic conflicts in Ethiopia are concerned now. We say, for example, mainly my assumption is that many of the ethnic conflicts are being incited by the government plus by other parties which say that this ethnic federalism, who would like to put the blame on ethnic federalism and the current constitution. And no research has shown that. I have not seen your assumption being substantiated by any research. In fact, there is huge media outcry from one political corner, and that is the unionist group, which say the current constitution is not working, ethnic federalism is not working. But that's not the case.
Yeah.
We say that ethnic federalism is, for us, for the southern people, it's a guarantee. In fact, it has been instrumental in bringing the country not to this chaos, but it has been a glue to make the country united. So I would not agree to the opinion, and I don't know whether this is substantiated by research or not. I'm sorry to say about that, but that's absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you very much for sharing your view and allowing me to clarify what I said. All I mentioned, and for example, first let me make very clear to everybody here, it is not my role as an American or a US government official to define a governance structure for Ethiopia. That is the role properly of Ethiopians. I was just referring to the assumption of that model, the implementation of that model following the overthrow of the Derg. And as you pointed out, there are now debates within Ethiopia, and different groups in Ethiopia have different views about whether or not that form of government was effectively implemented, or whether or not it should be updated or adjusted. So I want to make very clear, it is not my role to determine the form of government in Ethiopia. That is absolutely properly the role of Ethiopians. But it is clear that there was a form of government called ethnic federalism, and that now there is discussion about whether or not that form, however it was implemented, has been effective. So there are viewpoints articulated compellingly, such as yours, and I believe there are other viewpoints from other Ethiopians. I'm just trying to highlight that the issue of how to build an inclusive society that delivers services for all Ethiopians is an issue under discussion now in Ethiopia, and it will be important for its peace and stability and respect for the rich diversity of the country. Thank you for allowing me to clarify my point.
Thank you. We're going to go to the next question. I just want to make sure we're asking questions. I think we were going that way. Where were we going? Sure. So we're going a little zigzag, but we're going to get your questions in. And let's try and keep them as short as possible to make sure that everybody gets a question in.
Thank you so much. My name is Abdurrahim Mohammed. My question is, in 2018, there was a ceasefire was signed between Ethiopia and Ethiopian rebels like ONLF is one of the parties those who have signed the ceasefire. ONLF party, they have been taking their action, and you see this Ogaden community is still stable and working good. But on the side of our government, this ceasefire and the agreement was not yet taking any action. How did the United States know about these issues up to now?
Thank you very much. The question of stability in Oromia is very important to the United States. We're engaged in conversation with the government and advocating for a negotiated solution to the challenges there, and to be listening to the views of the Oromo, and again, contributing to the discussion about how the region and the country are governed. We're also concerned about the role of insurgents in Oromia, who often attack civilians or government infrastructure and create insecurity. And then that leads sometimes to a heavy-handed response by government security forces. So the civilians are caught in the middle of this dynamic. So we continue to advocate very strongly for negotiations and a peaceful resolution to the tensions in the Oromia region.
I'm sorry, we had a hard time hearing you, and so she was.
It's the same idea, right? It's the same challenge. where the central government, the federal government, needs to pursue with its different regions a peaceful path to addressing outstanding concerns. That military force, particularly internally, is rarely the answer. So I'm sorry that I misunderstood because I thought you said Oromia, but absolutely the Somali region, which I've had the pleasure to visit, is an important and vital part of Ethiopia, and the interests and concerns of its residents need to be respected. So what I outlined is the position of the U.S. government, that we encourage the government in Addis to work collaboratively and in negotiation with the different regions to address their concerns in a way so that there's inclusive governance that respects the rights of all.
Okay, I have the mic. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to share space with you. My question is pertaining justice and accountability in Ethiopia. Voices from different parts of the country, be it from Amhara, Oromia, or Tigray, echo the fact that there is no any sense of trust on the Ethiopian judiciary mechanism, nor on the Ethiopian government's commitment towards getting justice for the violations that occur in the country. So, despite this reality on the ground, the US government seems to be committed towards pushing and endorsing an Ethiopian international justice. So my question is really, could you please explain why, instead of working towards an international, independent, and credible justice and accountability mechanism that puts survivors at its corner, the US government is endorsing a federal government that is blamed of committing violations of human rights, including genocide, to lead efforts towards getting justice. The people on the ground whom I work with, and many of us work with, on day in and day out are telling us that they don't believe the Ethiopian government has the capacity nor the willingness to get justice. So why shouldn't the US government in its admirable efforts put the voices of the survivors at core and push for an international justice mechanism? And because this is not only because the federal Ethiopian government doesn't have the commitment, but also it ignores the fact that what happened mostly in Tigray is not a local matter. There is Eritrea, and if we're going to push only towards transnational mechanism led by Ethiopia, then Eritrea will walk out freely after committing gross violation of human rights, which would leave a precedent that would continue to destabilize the Horn of Africa. So my question is really to hear the logic behind supporting Ethiopia-led transnational justice while the people on the ground are saying we do not trust that is going to get us justice nor sustainable peace in the country. Thank you.
I want to thank you for raising the concerns of the victims of the violence and to express my sympathy and condolences in the first instance to what they have suffered. And it's communities on all sides who have suffered, and we agree that the best way forward for Ethiopia is to acknowledge what has transpired and to promote reconciliation. We have an office of internationally regarded lawyers. It's called the Office of Global Criminal Justice, and as you know, they have worked with the government of Ethiopia to help build a program. It doesn't surprise me that there is lack of trust or concern about government intentions given what communities and individuals have suffered in recent years. It's a principle of international law that it is always preferable to have a local solution. So if you can find a local solution, that's the most durable and effective. So that's one of the reasons why we contributed our expertise on this matter to help in the development of the government plan. But now the question becomes, and this is the most important question I think, will the government actually implement the plan? Because the plan as drafted could substantially contribute to addressing the questions of accountability and reconciliation. So in the first instance, we will look to see if the government moves forward on implementing that plan. And if there is not the success that we all hope for, then we can look for other solutions. But that's really what's driving our approach, in that there's a cascading, sequencing cadence in international law, which holds that, again, at the local level, that is the best way to set up a durable solution. So that's why we contributed our expertise, as did other partners. We have a group of international friends of Ethiopia with like-minded views who are also keeping an eye on this process. So I think this is a work in process, and we should stay in communication on this issue. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up with that question, and then we'll get back to the audience. When we're speaking about survivors and victims, we're specifically speaking about women. And GBV and CRSV, which is conflict-related sexual violence, we've spoken about this before, is a huge issue in East Africa. I recently had a guest essay published in the New York Times about CRSV in East Africa, and it is a huge, huge problem. What is the Bureau doing about this specific issue?
I have to tell you, this is not a Bureau-specific issue. Very sadly, this is an issue in all conflict. Women and children, as we see in ongoing conflict across the globe, are always the most vulnerable, always the greatest number of victims. So this is a problem that's being addressed internationally, globally, if you will, as well as at national level by the United States. So we have different strategies that mobilize different programs to help combat sexual violence in conflict. And we also work in the United Nations system and with our partners, particularly the UN technical agencies that provide assistance, like groups like UNICEF, for example, to see how we can ensure that their programming reaches those vulnerable victims. So it's not you're seeing it in Africa, I'm seeing it in Africa, it's terrible, but because it's a problem that's endemic to war, it's treated, if you will, at a global level.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yes, the microphone is here. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really want to thank the Undersecretary for taking time to really engage us. We rarely get this kind of opportunity. And I don't want to drop her into the quagmire of Ethiopia's internal, because most of the questions seem to be that direction. I would rather ask, as an American citizen, an issue that pertains to what she can do for us. Since the 1950s to 70, the United States spent over $20 billion on Ethiopia, particularly to move it to the democratic direction. This year, 2023, we spent over $2 billion. But if anybody looks at Ethiopia today, if I borrow that Mexican saying that say, "Oh, Mexico too far from God and too close to hell," I think Ethiopia today is too far from democratic culture and too close to an autocratic situation, which you mentioned. Is there a redefinition of the U.S. policy to look at the Horn in particular, because we are in a deficit of democratization, and particularly to Ethiopia? What is really the current prevailing thinking to really arrest Ethiopia from going down the hill, which is so? Thank you.
So when I work with my team at the State Department, I find that one of the issues that requires me to teach is the question of assistance, because we have many different flavors of assistance. So let me just clarify here, just for everybody so we understand. I know you understand, but I just want to make sure it's understood. So first of all, the United States is the largest donor contributing to humanitarian assistance. For example, we provide 50% of the budget to the World Food Program. We provide humanitarian assistance without regard to governance. So in countries across the world in conflict where people are suffering, no matter what type of government it is, if there's human need, we provide assistance. And in fact, it's a big problem now globally because the United States and other traditional large donors like the European Union, our Nordic friends, we can't keep up with the need, right? There's so much going on. But I do want to reassure people that we remain committed to humanitarian assistance for Africans in need, Ethiopians in need, without regard to governance. We separately have programs of development assistance, which are primarily implemented by the U.S. Agency for International Development. And in Africa, that has been mostly health. We engage heavily in health assistance, and with also the contribution of the Centers for Disease Control. We've done the miraculous PEPFAR program, which has saved more than 25 million lives in Africa over 20 years, and has really been a landmark contribution to helping with the health of the continent and help building health systems, including in Ethiopia. So that's an example of the kind of development assistance we do. We're also very interested in agricultural productivity. We have a program called Feed the Future, which you may have heard of, and the Secretary is also now working very closely with one of the world's leading agronomists, Dr. Carrie Fowler, to help improve seed distribution, seeds in particular that are resistant to climate change, as well as looking at soils, which soils, doing mapping of soils, and as climate change affects Africa, which are better areas to grow. So these are all tools that help build healthy, prosperous societies. A third area where we're trying to increase our engagement is to promote U.S. trade and investment in Africa. So we've had an important program of trade preferences known as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA. You may have heard of it. Over 30 countries in Africa benefit from this program. It's up for reauthorization in 2025, so please urge members of Congress to support reauthorization of this program. It also probably needs to be updated because it's a 20-year-old program. In AGOA, the law says you can't provide trade preferences to a government that's engaged in serious human rights violations. So because of the challenges that Ethiopia is currently undergoing, we had to suspend the AGOA program. And in part, that breaks my heart because I know it really helps women in Ethiopia, particularly women in the textile industry. But the law is very clear. It says if there are these gross human rights violations, those trade preferences can't be extended. So that's an example of how the conduct of the government and the situation will affect our assistance. Also, many of you in this room are businessmen. Many of you know about what it's like to try and engage in an unsettled environment. So if Ethiopia remains unstable because of these challenges from insurgents and the government response, we won't see the kind of American investment that we would prefer to see in Ethiopia, because America brings great technological know-how, we bring good practices. So we're a better friend and a better partner, and we would like to be engaged. As I said at the opening, we're concerned about instability in Ethiopia because of Ethiopia's rich history and its position. It has been and has the power to be, as you noted, a great leader in the Horn. And so we have frank discussions with the leadership about those issues, and we will continue to have those discussions. I also want to shout out to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, to Daniel Bekele, for the work that he's doing to highlight the challenges, and to encourage our partners in the government to take the steps necessary to restore Ethiopia's stability and to create the conditions for prosperity. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question back here.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming here, and I would like to thank the organizers also. My name is Kasim Arba, and I'm here to represent the Afar community of Minnesota. Earlier, you mentioned Ethiopia. Can you guys hear me well? Okay. So there is now, as we speak, there is a conflict waging in the Ogaden and Afar region of Ethiopia between the Somali and the Afar region. And this conflict is taking place inside the Afar region. This aggression has been going on since 2017. Somali and Afar are both Muslim Sunni. We never had any issue for over 100 years. Always there was a skirmish about resources, but it had never reached this level of violence. The Afar people are suffering, not only because of the environment that is really unforgiving, but it's also because of everything that happened in Ethiopia in the last wars, the last conflict in Tigray. In Tigray, Afar suffered a lot. They suffer now in the Afar region, in the middle of Samara. So my question is, you mentioned earlier that Ismail Omar Guelleh was a great leader. 99% Ismail Omar Guelleh, the president of Djibouti, you mentioned that he was a great leader. I'm sorry, I have to disagree. And 99% of Djiboutians will disagree with that also. He is behind the conflict that is taking place right now in Ethiopia between Afar and Somali. He's fueling this conflict for the last 7 years just because he wants to stay in power, and he's just fueling with money, weapon, and mercenaries. And this issue is going very far. So my question to you, since the United States have the biggest military base in Africa since 2003, sorry. What is the United States policy when it comes to the region, especially regarding the Afro people who are also maltreated, who are tortured, who are being treated as second-class citizens in Djibouti? And Ismail Margele has destroyed all the Afro region in Djibouti, and the same issue is going now in Ethiopia. What is, since you guys have the embassy since the inception of Djibouti, and since 2003 you have the military, what is you guys doing to stop Ismail Margele mingling and interfering in politics in Somalia, also in Ethiopia?
I want to thank you for raising the important concerns of the Afar region and the Afar people, and to acknowledge that, as you pointed out, they did suffer as well during the war in Tigray. And we're glad that the guns have been silenced, and it's important now to help those communities rebuild. You've talked about two sets of problems, one between the Afar and Somali peoples in Ethiopia, and also about your concerns about the Afar people in Djibouti. I'm happy to repeat what I've said before. It's important for Ethiopia to work with the different regions, with the different communities, its great diverse ethnic population, to find peaceful resolution to local and national tensions, and we will continue to advocate for that. I said President Gile is an experienced leader. He is an experienced leader, but we, like he, are looking forward to the upcoming election, and you will find the United States supporting a free and fair electoral process in Djibouti to refresh the governance there. He has been an important partner to us because the US base has been there, but as we advocate for democracy in other countries in Africa and around the world, we will advocate for a good, strong, healthy process in Djibouti.
Thank you for that question. I do want to follow up because Djibouti is a very international country. It is, the Horn of Africa is a geopolitically very, very important location. We are seeing China, Russia, Turkey, all of the rest of the world in there. What are your thoughts on where America stands when the rest of the world is too many hands in the cookie jar?
I'm careful to try and not think about Africa as a toy that we're going to fight over with other countries. And that's the position of Secretary Blinken. He wants Africans to have choices. And he believes that we have a value proposition, which I can discuss and advocate, as you might imagine, where we are a good partner and a good friend. But we can't do everything. And it's important for Africans to be able to engage like we engage with other countries all around the world. One of the goals of the Biden administration and Secretary Blinken is to lift Africa up to be part of the global conversation. So I think some of you are familiar with our advocacy successfully for the African Union to join South Africa in the G20. And the G20 probably needs to expand even more to include more African voices. We are strong proponents of reform of the Security Council to provide permanent African seats. Our Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, who I understand is in Minnesota this week, who doesn't even know really that I exist, but I know that she exists, and I have great admiration for her because she is working hard to reform the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks so that African interests, are properly addressed. So for example, she's successfully advocated for Africans to have seats on the executive boards of the IMF, the World Bank, and also an important multilateral development bank known as the European, a lot of Ethiopia here, the European Development and Reconstruction Bank. She's working to try and make sure that the financial programming addresses the credit challenges of many African nations and the infrastructure needs of many African nations. And the administration is trying to work with Congress to ensure more resources are poured into different programs and facilities, they call them, of these groups so that they address the urgent needs of Africa. So these are ways in which we are trying to be a good partner to Africa and not limit other partners from engaging productively. We do have concerns, quite honestly, in particular about Russian engagement in Africa. Wherever you see Russian engagement, the result is not usually happy. We see exploitation of resources, we see greater insecurity, we see greater civilian casualties, particularly in other countries also fighting terrorism, like in the Sahel. China has been a good partner to Africa in many ways, but as I discussed earlier, in other ways it has not been a good partner in terms of exploitation of resources without regard to the people and their environment. I think there's a lot of space for everyone, but it's important not to recreate the Cold War. It's important not to have a colonial attitude towards Africa. So that's what we strive to do. We're a good partner. We believe strongly that if you work with us, the outcome is usually positive. But we recognize that Africans have the right and agency to engage in other partnerships as well.
It's good to know. I do want to remind everyone we still have time for questions, but Assistant Secretary Maliki's portfolio is not just Ethiopia, it is all of Africa. So if you have questions about anywhere else, please feel free to ask them too. Where is the microphone now? Back here, yes please. Oh, and it's over
Hi. Thank you so much for giving us your experience and sharing your thoughts with us on the region. My name is Saida, and I was just looking at more in depth about the Bureau of Africa Affairs, so I'm not going to ask any political questions, so mine will be very easy. One of your missions says that you're supporting Africa as African states progress towards stability, citizen-responsive governance, and self-reliance. I think that, or the question I have is that, what is the Bureau doing in terms of really engaging the diaspora to be on the field with them? Because I know from experience that the diaspora are a soft power to use to create better relationships. And I say that because I've been working in Somalia for the last 5 years, and I've seen what the technocrats on the ground can do. So going there alone to do this kind of work, because we have all these responsibilities as diasporas, is not enough. What is the Bureau as a institution trying to do that, to bridge that field work for technocrats who are on the ground to help them? Or even within your teams, how are you utilizing the diaspora community, particularly in Somalia?
Before you guys answer the question, I was thinking maybe I could go around and ask everyone to ask their question, and you guys could make a note of it, given that we're limited on time. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is called Hamid Mashihi, and thank you, Ms. Moligol. I come from an area that Dr. Abiy is trying to annex. On January 1st, he announced that he will annex part of Somalia, and that's the maritime area near Djibouti. That area has a long history. I mean, for the last seven centuries, we had war with Abyssinia, because Ethiopia was called before Abyssinia. Ethiopia had the name, the black face, and the whole continent of Africa was called Ethiopia. And Ethiopia adopted Ethiopia 120 years ago, but before it was called Abyssinia. So for the last 600 years, we had wars. So, and even during the Cold War, that area I come from was always the playground for the superpowers. The Soviets, when they intervened and when they were bringing meals, and before that, the F-5s, they used it to shell us, to kill us, to strafing all the times. So the people over there are really angry. They are really angry that Ethiopia, that annexed 1/3 of the Somali territory before, is trying now to annex part of Somalia. My question is, and for that I would say that in 2006, when Ethiopia intervened to Mogadishu in Somalia and tried to occupy, it actually occupied Mogadishu. that ignited a war, and that gave birth to the terrorist groups, Al-Shabaab. So now, the problem is, Ethiopia is doing the same, and even doing the worse than that. So it's killing the trust and the goodwill that was created in between Somalia and Ethiopia for the last 30 years. So my question is, isn't it, and also Dr. Abiy is killing the Tigrays, he's killing the Oromos, he's killing the Amharas, he's killing all the nationalities, and he's trying to bring back the Cold War again to the area. So my question is, isn't it time to stop Dr. Abiy and sanction him directly? And you also answered the question partially, but isn't it, because it's good for the whole area, because it's destabilizing the whole area. He's a threat to the peace of the world. And he was given the Nobel Prize of Peace, which is really a contradiction, an oxymoron, because he's really the, they should have given him the Nobel Prize of War. So isn't it time to stop him and to sanction him directly and his cronies?
Thank you for that question. Where are we going from here? Okay, we're going to do our best to keep them short, please.
Thank you. My question actually is the base of what my colleague said. I am from Somaliland, and there will be an election in November 13, 2024. So my first part of the question is there a specific, tangible thing that the United States will contribute to that election, which is rare to happen in that region? My second question is the MOU, which he was referring to. MOU, from Somaliland perspective, we see as a development integration in East Africa. It's a concept that have to be embraced, because the future cannot be a conflict, cannot be what happened 100 years. And the example of that one is when Somaliland was developing Berbera Port, there was a lot of noises and a lot of rejections coming from Mogadishu. But now Berbera Port become one of the best ports in Africa. I think it was third in this year. So my question to you is, what is the view from the United States perspective for the MOU? Thank you.
Thank you. Are we only doing 3 questions? Okay. So the first question, you remember all 3? Okay.
Thanks. So with regard to the role of the diaspora and how to have better communication between the diaspora and the State Department, and particularly the Bureau of African Affairs, I would like to point out that I'm here today. And my physical presence is because I recognize, as the United States, the administration generally recognizes, the important role the diaspora can play. You have a special knowledge and expertise, as Nora has talked about, and we can play complementary roles in promoting peace and security in the countries of your origin. And we appointed Nora Dempsey as the first senior advisor, and she is here and a great partner, as you heard from our uncle Faisal Roble, and what an important role she's played. Have we perfected communication with the diaspora? No. So I would encourage you to help us work on that. I also want to remind folks who may not be aware that last year we established the U.S.-Africa Diaspora Council, which is comprised of 12 distinguished leaders from the diaspora, from the Black community in the United States, leaders in many fields: religion, education, business, the creative industry, sports. Those are rotating chairs because we have such a rich diaspora in the United States, so we want to be able to give others opportunity to participate. The current membership is traveling to Nigeria this summer, and we're really looking forward to their engagement in Lagos and Abuja. But this National Council, we have not yet perfected the engagement with state and city councils. So continue to work with us on this matter, but we recognize the importance of the diaspora and the importance of your expertise and contributions. So I hope that's well understood. We are all concerned about the MOU, but let me first state U.S. policy. It is not up to the United States or any other country to determine the governance structure of Somalia. That is the role of the people of Somalia and the people of Somaliland. And that's what we encourage, dialogue. as the federal government has dialogue with member states of Somalia. So when that MOU issue first came up, the United States led the effort to firmly assert what is basically the bread and butter of international relations, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia. And you saw, we spoke to that, as did most other governments in Africa and in the international community. Again, those are common principles applicable all over the world as they are in the Horn. So with regard to the upcoming election, Somaliland has a respectable and admirable history of elections. Unfortunately, I hear some reports, which you may know more about, that there may be an effort to delay those elections. We don't think that would be good for Somaliland, and we would encourage the elections to go forward as scheduled. That's an important principle here and in every country in which we work in Africa. I do want to highlight that this is I think, as I said at the outset, a difficult, if not perilous moment for the Horn, right? The Houthi engagement in the Red Sea disrupts shipping. Ethiopia has a legitimate right to commercial access to the sea. That right is enshrined for all landlocked countries in international law. But it doesn't mean that there needs to be land grabbing, as the president said. We oppose that. That's why we, again, have sought over and over again to demonstrate we respect Somalia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we will continue to do that. But the moment is difficult, and it's important, I think, for all governments in the region, whether they be Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, who are tested by al-Shabaab. So we need to find a way to promote that continued collaborative effort with the support from your external partners, as I described earlier, with the Quartet partners. So we will continue to advocate for a resumption of a collaborative partnership with respect for, again, it's important to say a third time, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thank you.
We're going to take 3 more questions. 4 more questions.
Just want to say a very important person came into the room while I was talking. So let's welcome Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator.
So I'm sure she's very busy. So Mabel, I'm happy to adjust our timing to make sure she has an opportunity to speak.
Sorry, can I check through an ETA? How are we on time? We have enough time for questions?
Thank you, Assistant Secretary. We really appreciate the U.S. government's effort to stabilize the Horn of Africa and the whole African continent. And especially we appreciate your efforts assigning, the special envoys to negotiate the peace between Ethiopian federal government and the TPLF. So the cessation of hostility agreement has been signed almost 2 years ago. So how do you just evaluate its implementation? There are some positive progresses and still challenges ahead. What do you know your position? And if it is successful, what is the plan or you take just to extend that model into other conflicts in Ethiopia, as well as even to extend it to Sudan?
Thank you very much for raising the importance of not neglecting implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement. I hope we've learned our lesson from other conflicts where you put down the guns, but then people walk away and they don't address the fundamental challenges that caused the guns to be lifted in the first place. So Ambassador Mike Hammer, who is a wonderful colleague and friend, and I have been working very hard with the African Union and other international partners to make sure that we don't neglect implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement, or because we're Americans and we make an acronym out of everything, it's called COHA. So when Mike and I were in Addis in February, we asked the AU to convene a meeting of external partners of Ethiopia to talk about the funding that's required and the actions that are required. And Mike continues to work under the AU leadership to try and pursue implementation of COHA. All of you who care about Ethiopia, who have family and friends in Ethiopia, I also encourage you to push forward for implementation and again to address the underlying challenges and to make sure there's economic opportunity and reconstruction and rebuilding. So thank you very much for raising that point.
Okay, we're gonna end this with one last question from me, and that is sustainability. We are in the middle of an election cycle. I'm so sorry. We're in the middle of an election cycle where there's a chance that administration can change. And so where you guys have been doing so much work in the African Bureau, especially with Nora, and how is that going to last if things were to change administration-wise?
What I can tell you is that President Biden said in December 2022, when he hosted African leaders from all over the continent, he said, "I'm all in on Africa." And you've seen the work of his administration to engage in some of the ways I've discussed here today to support our African friends and our African partners. And that's the position of his administration, and I'm hopeful that position will carry forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We are ending it here and switching over. I'm going to say something. Thank you.
Maybe we can talk to her on the side. Yeah, on the side.
That was a very informative fireside chat, and I'm sorry that a lot of you guys weren't able to ask questions. Time is pretty tight this afternoon. I'd like to call up Tom Hansen, who's part of the Foreign Relations Committee here in Minnesota, to, of course, he's the chairperson, to welcome up some of our esteemed guests here, and then afterwards we'll have Dr. Annette Weber from the European Union make a few remarks virtually. So I'd like to call up Tom Hansen.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you so much to Mabel and especially to Molly for a great presentation. Thank you for all that you've done for U.S.-African relations in your current position as Assistant Secretary, also in your Foreign Service career. Thank you so much. And Nora, thank you for being there for the diaspora communities around the country. Africa is the future. And the African diaspora is essential to the future of Minnesota. Africa last year was the second fastest growing region in the world. 11 of the 20 fastest growing economies were in Africa. Africa has come together with a continent-wide free trade area, which they're in the process of implementing. It's an extremely dynamic and important part of the world. The many organizations here today show the strong commitment that we have to support forging connections between Minnesota and East Africa and Africa more generally. And there are new initiatives underway, and working together we can make Minnesota a national hub for relations between Minnesota and Africa and the United States and Africa. We value the cooperation from Molly and Nora as representatives of the State Department and Africa's place in U.S. foreign policy. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, someone who has been a great friend and supporter of globally minded organizations in Minnesota, and who has been and has advocated an active role for Minnesota in the world. There is no stronger supporter in Congress for democracy and human rights worldwide. It's an honor to introduce the senior senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar.
Big chairs. All right. Well,
Thank you so much, all of you. It's great to be back at the Norway House. Thank you, Christina. Last time I was here, we honored Walter Mondale, who was such a big believer in global peace and foreign aid, and my mentor. Learned a lot from him about what we need to make the world a better place. I'm so excited that we are hosting this 2024 East Africa Leadership Summit because we all know, as Tom just said, Africa is the future. And we know that. I don't think you'd guess that when you read all the headlines, right, of the news every day. There's many major challenging things going on around the world. We know they're all in our heads. But we also have to, while we deal with those crises, we also have to think about that future with Africa and about what's happening in some of the countries and how we have to be there to support these countries. I always think about a story that former President Clinton used to tell about how USAID had helped one of the African nations and had brought manufacturing to the nation, and he had gone on a tour of the factory, and he had gotten a shirt there, and he took that shirt and he put it in front of his closet so that every single time he opened his closet he saw that shirt, and he thought, they don't hate us, they like us because we were there to help. And we have to think about this and remember that this is about peace in the world, and it's about, as been pointed out, thank you very much, Molly Fee, for your leadership. This is also about this incredible community in Minnesota and across the country, but it's also about the long haul. When you build friends and you reach out and you do the right thing, they are friends for a very long time, and it's good for us in our country. It's one of the arguments that we have to make for foreign aid, because sometimes there are, I'm trying to be nice about this right now, but there are forces against involvement in foreign relations. I think you know that. And people that think we can just shut our eyes and bury our heads in the sand and pretend these things aren't happening, well, they always come knocking at our own doors when we do that. And it's not the right thing to do for our economy or for our future. So I want to thank Mohammed Ismail, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Institute of Horn of Africa Studies, for greeting me and helping to put this together. I also know you heard from the Somali president, which I'm sure was an honor. I just want to tell you why Africa is so meaningful to me. The first is obvious, our community. I'm so proud of the staff that I have from East Africa. First I see Beirut back there, who's back working for me again, which is really exciting. And then also Siad Ali, where are you? Right over here. Who for our visitors from other places is the first Somali American on the Minneapolis School Board, and served with much distinction in that role. But for me, he's been with me how many years, Siad? How many? Why do you know? 18 years. 18 years. Siad has been there. 16 years. We don't want to exaggerate. We don't want to get a Pinocchio. But when I go into workplaces, sometimes I turn a corner and someone is there working from the community, and maybe sometimes they don't know English that well, or they don't know me, and all they do is they look at me and they say, Siad. So he has been an incredible leader in our office and for our state. Minnesota, as you know, has the largest Somali population in America, but we're also home to sizable populations from Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea. And in fact, my dad, getting to my second reason I care so much, spent a lot of time in Africa when he died recently at age 93. But it was he was an adventurer, he liked to go places. But he got involved in microcredit, and he wrote a book called Barefoot Capitalism about Africa and his time, and some of it was Tanzania, some of it was Kenya. But the work that must be done to help people lift themselves up. I remember during one of my visits to Africa, meeting a woman who had her husband had died, and she had a small farm, and we had gone like an hour and a half drive to get to meet her, and she grew just a small plot of teff. And she, through, I think it was the Gates Foundation, was a leader in the town for helping women get maternity care and make sure that they had sanitation and the like. And these senators are there, 5 women senators, and we're asking her these kind of senator-like questions, you know, well, how did you get this? How do you grow your crop? How do you do this? And she's explaining how she has to walk 2 hours every day for water. And then finally someone asked, and what's your biggest challenge? She says she walks 2 hours every day for water. And she said, challenge? I don't have challenges, I'm a leader. And she points to this organizational chart on the wall that showed her hut, and that she was a leader in the community, and she showed the solar panels she got that helped her kids to be able to read. That's what I want to see more of from our country, investment in that kind of, because it's not just saving the world from disease, and it is not just making sure that people have as much as they need to make a livelihood, whether it's microcredit, whether it's farming, but it is also about that spirit that we need to convey. And you only show that spirit if you have people's back. I believe our state is stronger because of our East African immigrants and refugees. I have seen firsthand how you have strengthened our economy as business owners. You're saving lives as nurses and doctors. You're keeping our cities safe as firefighters and police officers, and you're shaping the next generation of teachers. So one of my favorite photos of my daughter is when she was in 6th grade, and she was in Tuttle School in Minneapolis. And her whole school, her whole class was made up of Hmong refugee kids and Somali refugee kids, mostly Somali refugee kids. And I want you to picture her. She was sort of small, this kid with these really tall Somali girls in the class photo. And when I look at that photo of her proudly standing with her class, it is a reminder to me, as those girls are now in their 20s and those boys are now in their 20s, of generation after generation of immigrants, and the strong belief that I have and will always have that immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. So what do we need to do? You just heard some of our policy challenges in that wonderful discussion, and I know you'll have more questions. I also saw your lunches out there, so I know the only thing between you and your lunches is me. So I'm going to make this brief, and I know Siad will stay on. We have some flooding in southern Minnesota that is really, really dangerous right now. It's getting worse today, so I'm going to have to go tend to that. But a stable East Africa is important for all of us. Chris Coons is one of my best friends in the Senate. I just texted him and told him I was coming here, as you know. He does a significant work on Africa. That is his passion. He is very close to President Biden. I had him come out here once to speak, and some of you were there. It was years ago when he first got to the Senate, and he was shocked at how many Minnesotans showed up. And I'm like, welcome to our state. First of all, I know that the Kenyan president's recent visit to Washington with President Biden and the dinner represented what is truly a historic step toward prosperity and stability in the region, and show the priority that this administration places on Africa. We must continue to step up our diplomatic efforts in the Horn of Africa. We're working to ensure that we have people in place to move to work toward peace and democracy and prosperity. Minnesota's own Cynthia Kirst was just confirmed as the new ambassador to Djibouti. There was a hold put on her by some Republican, not like I ever have problems with this, even getting the Norwegian ambassador through. I had to once make 15 speeches about lutefisk, that is a true story, on the Senate floor because Ted Cruz had a hold on the Swedish and Norwegian ambassadors. I won. But the same thing with I literally had to call 3 different senators on the ambassador to Djibouti, and I'm very pleased we got that done. It shows that America cares when we have people in place. But we still know, despite our work in getting the ambassadors in place, bringing the leaders of these countries to America, doing all we can on foreign aid. We still know there are millions of East Africans living under the threat of political violence, from civil conflicts in Sudan and Ethiopia to militant activity to the insurgency in Somalia, and flooding. Droughts and famine have left millions without access to basic essentials like food, water, or a place to call home. That's why we need strong foreign aid programs now more than ever. USAID, under the very strong leadership of Ambassador Samantha Power, has provided significant funding in years past in response to natural disasters and food insecurity in East Africa. I remember one time I even got Tom Emmer, who's now number 3 in leadership in the House, to do a press conference with me at the American Refugee Building on the need to make sure that we got U.S. foreign aid to Somalia. You can use our arguments about, as I just did, on food insecurity and the economy, but you also can make security, American security arguments that this is very important. And it is critical that we now redouble our efforts in the region. We took a step in the right direction under the national security package that Congress passed earlier this year, which included significant funding for the international disaster assistance, but as you all know, much more needs to be done. Chris just worked around the clock. There were many of us that said that we would not support that package without including humanitarian aid, and I was one of them. So we have to keep having leaders who are willing to stand up for the aid that we need is so important. After years of drought, which has been a major challenge, more than 23 million people across East Africa face severe hunger, and 50 million people across the region are being pushed towards starvation. That's why we must ensure America continues to be the world's largest donor of humanitarian food assistance. Critical to that effort is maintaining strong funding for the McGovern-Dole Food for Education and Food for Peace programs, which are part of the Farm Bill. And guess who's going to be chairing the Agriculture Committee next year? Look at her. So this is one of my top priorities as a senior member of the Ag Committee. I worked to make sure the last Farm Bill funded these programs, and I'm fighting to protect them in this next bill, which I actually hope we get done this summer, this year, before I take over. That'll allow us to focus more deeply on some of the other issues we have, and that would be the best for this aid, that we get it done right away, but we stand ready to go. Together, McGovern-Dole and Food for Peace have given children and families in East Africa and across the globe a new lease on life. For example, the McGovern-Dole program recently funded a project in Madagascar, I went there once, which provides meals to students. During its first week alone, the program served more than 12,000 meals to students in 18 schools. In the coming years, the program will expand to 130 schools. This assistance saved lives. And during a time when East African nations are torn apart by conflict and natural disasters, it could not be more critical. So we must continue pushing that. We must continue telling that story of the shirt in the closet. We must continue talking about the community in here and how much it means to our economy and how much it means to our nation's economy. That's how we continue to make the case. Security for our nation, economy, and economic future for our people for foreign aid. We take serving others seriously in our state, and our East African families are living proof of that. They've been here to improve lives, their own and their neighbors. I will never forget joining a group of volunteers at a hunger relief organization, spending the day with my daughter, who was very short at the time, measuring our grain in coffee cups. But the thing that I most remember about that day was all the Somali families that were there to help, that were there doing the same thing to help the people at home. That grain was going abroad. On a typical Saturday, they might have been out having a fun day in the park, or going shopping, or going to our great Somali mall not too far away. But they were there standing shoulder to shoulder with their moms and dads, measuring out grain and packing meals and saving the lives of children that they've never met. By being at this summit, you're doing that too. The discussions you have today will bring us closer to peace and stability in East Africa and prosperity for East Africans across the globe. Thank you and enjoy your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Once again, welcome to East African Leadership Summit. Thank you to Senator Amy for that timely and powerful word. And thank you to Assistant Secretary Malifi for informative fireside. It is a great honor to introduce today's theme speaker, who will be joining us virtually. We are privileged to have with us Dr. Annette Weber, the European Union Special Representative for the Horn of Africa. Dr. Weber brings 2 decades of expertise in international diplomacy and African security affairs. Her extensive career has been dedicated to conflict resolution, mediation, fostering regional stability, particularly in the Horn of Africa. In her current role as EU Special Representative, Dr. Annette Weber has been instrumental in addressing complex crises in the region. She works tirelessly to promote sustainable peace and security, developing a comprehensive strategy, navigating the intricate of dynamic regional conflict. Her efforts are crucial in fostering stability and cooperation in the Horn of Africa. Dr. Weber's academic and professional journey is distinguished by her deep involvement in African peace process. She holds robust background in African studies and conflict management, has consistently contributed to advancing peace initiatives across the continent. In her prior role as the Senior Fellow at German Institute for International and Security Affairs, she oversaw critical research providing strategic insight into African security issues. Beyond her professional achievement, Dr. Weber is a passionate advocate for dialogue and collaboration. She emphasized the importance of local perspective and solution in addressing regional conflicts, advocating for a holistic approach to peace building that integrate political, social, and economic dimensions. Today, Dr. Weber joined us virtually to share her valuable insight to challenges and opportunities for leadership in East Africa. Her experience and vision will undoubtedly enrich our understanding and inspire us to work toward advancing peace and development in the region. Please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Annette Weber. Yes. As I said, she is joining us virtually, so just give us a minute.
Kika, Anika Kokoshi.
Hi.
That's her.
Hi. We were in DC together. Yeah. We were together.
Yeah, I know. Get the question.
What was your question?
Oh, okay. I will get it. I will get it. Just a minute.
Cool.
Let's get it.
It's written. Okay. Do you want my info, babe? You don't have it?
Let
me give you my information.
Oh, my phone is being recorded.
Okay. Oh, I was on your camera. Yeah, my fault.